But what's interesting is you could raise your voice slightly with another person and they could melt on a puddle on the floor. So how much you push, because the creative conflict is that you push just right for the people involved to get engagement.
Welcome back to the Badass Leaders Podcast. And if you've been listening for a while, you know I love talking about conflict. And that's what today is all about, conflict resolution, how to really crush it in a badass way. So who's our guest? Well, today, our guest is not your average leadership consultant. Karen Valencic is an engineer turned black belt and the founder of Spiral Impact, a methodology that fuses physics, martial arts, and real-world leadership into a powerful approach to conflict and collaboration. With over 30 years of experience helping leaders transform resistance into momentum, Karen brings a fresh, no BS perspective to what it really takes to lead with impact. She's the author of the Black Belt edition of Spiral Impact, The Power to Get It Done with Grace. And her work has been sought after by Fortune 500s, healthcare systems, and academic institutions. If you're into bold ideas and real conversations about what it takes to lead, make sure you follow us on LinkedIn for behind-the-scenes clips, takeaways, and upcoming guests. Are you ready? I am so excited. So join me, Angela Gilnelms, on today's episode of the Badass Leaders Podcast, where I'm joined each week by industry experts for intimate and eye-opening discussions about the challenges and joys facing the leaders of today. Listen in and get ready to scale your company, grow your business, and unlock your full badass potential. I don't know if you know this, Karen, but the listeners do know this, that I love talking about conflict. Conflict resolution is my favorite topic.
And I think if you're in what I call conflict mastery, if you've mastered conflict, you've got freedom.
Right?
It's like the only thing really that you got to do.
How do we get people who are terrified of conflict to realize that by being brave enough to learn the techniques to master conflict, that they then receive that freedom? How do we get people to understand that, Karen?
So that's my mission, actually. And I find with my model, Spiral Impact, it gives people tools that are not scary. They're not scary. Because I think when we think about dealing with conflict, we're always thinking of confrontation. And confrontation is something I rarely advise. It's very rare that I say, go confront them. And confront is face-to-face, head-to-head, toe-to-toe, and that's rarely works unless you're in a really dominant situation and you're the dominant person. So there's a lot of other ways of doing it, and that's the thing I love about my work is when people can feel it and they can see it, and really my newsletter is called Yes, because it's that like yeah, this shit works,
Yeah, I love that. This shit works. It works with grace, right? It works with grace. Okay,
yeah, it does.
So now, listeners, you have a little teaser about what we're going to talk about. So don't you dare leave this episode because you're going to miss all of the valuable information you need to make it you lose your fear of conflict. So,
Yeah.
but first, we want to know who you, Karen, who you are as a human being. So tell us about yourself. What brought you to the stage? A little bit of your background. You don't have to say the year you were born. We won't ask that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
But tell us a little bit. I was born in 1975. I turned 50 next month. So
Okay.
The listeners already know that.
Fabulous 50. It's the new 30. Yeah.
Absolutely. I feel a little bit like I'm 30. Now, my body is starting to tell me I'm not 30, and I'm just going to have conflict resolution with my body.
Okay.
So let's go into you. I'm going to shut up now, and you tell us about you. Who are you as a human being?
So, what I always come to is what my primary purpose and values are, and they're around honor. And in my deeper work, I talk a lot about intention and purpose-based intention, and mine is to honor myself and others. I really care about people. I love helping people grow and really step into their power. That is it's just really jazzy for me to do that. And so, I'm an engineer by education. I have a degree in mechanical engineering, and I worked in that field for about 10 years in the auto industry, and I did product development. And truly, the work I do now, I almost called my business the physics of conflict, because it's really all very much the same. And I think one of the questions you asked is, why I get asked a lot, why would you leave engineering and do this? And I find that the people aspect is just really fascinating, and it's very similar in so many ways. And I really love those projects when I can actually do both. So I sometimes have consulting gigs that are process involved as well as people involved, and that's really fun for me. So I'm an Aikidoist. I've practiced martial arts for 34 years now. I hold a third dan black belt in the martial art of Aikido. And that's just a huge part of who I am. And it's something that keeps me very active and flexible and moving and all of that. And so I love that practice. I'm also a mom. I have 2 grown daughters that I'm, just so proud of everything about them. I'm so proud of, and I love being a parent. So, and I live in Indianapolis, Indiana, which is the center of the United States. So that's a bit about me. But my primary thing is I really love people. And I love them more the more conflict we have, kind of. In this right now in our history.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. And
I love that you said that.
Yeah, and I think right now, and I don't want to get into talking so much about politics, or we could, but I think it's really important for me. It's like, to fight hate with hate is really a bad idea, and that goes nowhere positive. And so I'm always looking at people as we're one. In my martial arts practice, we have this connection, and what I do to you, I do to myself. And so I'm very conscious about that, and not that I condone everybody's behavior, but I realize that we're all here trying to do the best we can, and sometimes that looks pretty ugly. But my prayer, my hope is that through these really difficult times, we will all emerge more connected than we ever have been before. So that's my.
The reason I was so stoked about you saying about the more conflict, the more you love people, is I also think that individuals don't understand that if you have the ability to sit in conflict with somebody else and have that experience of getting to understand their perspective, their concerns, what brings them to that area of conflict as well, then you get to know them as a human.
Yeah.
And really, I strongly believe that most humans are amazing people, and we forget all of those pieces of their personality behind that. And then when you have that opportunity to work through conflict with them, then suddenly some of the people I've had conflict with are some of my closest friends.
Yeah. And when you can work through that, you come closer. You come closer.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I think now, because I'm going to say I've studied this and taught it for many decades, and I still mess up sometimes, but I always re-enter back in. And it's, again, if you understand the tools and you understand the physics of conflict, it makes it so much easier. And most people come into the work world, which is primarily where I do work, is in businesses. Most people come informed about conflict from their families, primarily. And I don't know about you, but I don't know that many families that have really functional conflict.
No, I don't either.
I know mine
I don't.
not.
I don't come from one.
No, I don't either. And I think that, And it's funny because a lot of times you'll hear parents say about their children, they're fighting, well, they just need to figure it out. And I don't agree with that at all. Because when you let kids figure it out, the most dominant person takes control, and everybody learns these very dysfunctional ways of dealing with differences. And I know for myself, I grew up in a family where there was a lot of fighting, and I took on the role to be the peacemaker. And so I became this person that accommodated everybody's little need. And
Were you the third child, by the way?
No, I was the second child.
Okay, because it's always like, is it the middle child or the third one who ends up being the peacemaker?
My family doesn't fit those models around the child order, but I was the only girl between two boys, and I just
ditto.
and I was the peacemaker. And so what I found, well, when I was married, and I'm in a fantastic relationship now with my kid's father, but we're not married anymore and haven't been for years. But I was accommodating, and you cannot accommodate. And then I started learning this work, and I did things differently, and it didn't fit in our marriage. So anyway, it's just fascinating to watch that. But those people also look to media and entertainment for their skills. And isn't that cool? And it's interesting, over the years you can see this language come through popular media. And it's hard to keep up with. when you've been around for a long time, it's like, I heard someone say a word the other day, and I thought, what did they say? It was you're going to laugh when you hear it, and I can't remember what it was, but it was a word I associate with really awful, but it was actually cool, and I was like, oh, okay. So language changes, and it's hard. It does. You got to keep up with it, and also be willing to always ask the question, well, what do you mean by that? Because sometimes I think, well, what are you saying? It was sick. The use of the word
sick.
I'm like, it's sick.
I was thinking the word bad too. You remember there were years where something, if it was bad, that meant it was really good. Like it was,
Right. And so it gets really confusing. You got to stay up with it. And anybody in your audience that's in their 20s may think that's kind of silly, but when after decades, you realize how much language changes. But media and entertainment really impact people as well. And I think the whole usage of the word that's something that we saw in entertainment a few years ago, and it kind of drives me nuts, like this, like that. But passive, comedies are passive aggressive. I watch comedies.
Very, very true. And they're meant to, because people somehow are attracted to that and can relate. You know what's so funny about the word is that I believe in constantly growing and constantly improving. So I listen to my own episodes, and I was listening to one recently, and I text Katie, the executive producer, and I said, oh my goodness, I say way too much. Why have you not told me to stop saying it is a nails on a chalkboard to me. And it's one of those things that I think about. You know what I was also just realizing? I've talked on this podcast a lot about my childhood because I came from a very abusive home, and I was the only one being abused. So it was also this dynamic of me being the middle of the oldest three kids, right? Yeah. And between two brothers, and being the only one that was abused, and having an older brother who is brilliant and very dominating. Yeah. And then a younger brother who was the accommodator and the peacemaker. Yeah. And one thing that I just realized when you were talking about that is that over the years as we became adults, I've always been, once I escaped that environment, the person that I'm not afraid to have difficult conversations with people and work towards something that's going to be for the greater good. Yeah. Well, the problem I realized in my relationship with my younger brother, he and I used to be best friends, is that if a conflict came up that involved my oldest brother, the dominator, then my younger brother knew I would love him regardless, and my love wasn't tied to whether or not he agreed with me, but it wasn't the same the other way around. So it was better for him to be accommodating to the older brother than
Right.
me, because he wasn't going to lose the love for me, but he was in that way. And
Yeah.
I think that ties to so much of what we learn as children that
Yeah.
then we take into business, and we
Right.
take it into our VP of sales and why we may or may not be getting along with them or marketing or whatever.
Right, right, exactly. And really, I think what I notice is it's the people that are really loud that's easier to deal with because you know what you're dealing with. It's the people that are really quiet that when there's conflict in groups going on, it's really hard to really know what's going on. So you have to, when I work with teams, I do a lot of stuff with this content of spiral impact and what is conflict and all that. And I really try to create a very safe environment for people to be able to speak. And I've had some amazing things, magical things happen. And I was, one of my early first clients was a technology group, and it was mainly men. And it was, back then I called it creating with conflict. And there was this group of guys, and they were really very loud in their conflict. And they kind of were dismissive, saying, we already know how to create through conflict. We just rumble about. And then, of course, as we were talking about, well, what does that do with other people? This one woman, I think she might have been the only woman in that group, she raised her hand and she said, and you guys, you've got to know when you're doing all that, you'll never hear from me because it scares me. And that was and that room got just totally silent. Totally.
First off, kudos to her.
Yeah, right.
What a powerful moment in her life to
Yes.
pause and
Yeah.
speak her truth so that other people could understand that.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was really amazing. It was really amazing. And so, that same group, it was so interesting. I'm going to say this because I feel like your listeners will probably get something out of this too. In that same group, I had a guy that was one of those people, if you've ever worked with groups, which you have, I'm sure.
Yes, I have.
And there was a guy that did not want to be there, and he leaned in his chair back against the back wall the whole time, and he was very aggressive toward me. And this was, and what was great is I could model what I was teaching with him. So it was.
And how dare you come in and help them grow, right?
Right. And so and they did a smile sheet after that, and his feedback was, this is the biggest waste of time and money that we could ever have done when there's so much else that we could be doing. And a few weeks later,
I know those leaders.
Yeah. And a few weeks later, I was asking to one of the principals of the company, and I said, well, what are you seeing? And he said, well, I tell you what, he says, I am seeing a dramatic difference to the better of one person in particular in this group. And I said, well, who's that? JD. It was the guy. And so it's really fast. I just find it fascinating. Just what people, how they show up and what they do and all of that. So,
well,
yeah.
I think it also ties to not believing necessarily what people tell you,
Right.
but instead believe what they show by their actions and
Exactly.
by those types of things, because
Precisely.
oftentimes they do not mix together. Okay, I also want to, in the very beginning, you mentioned, and it's, of course, one of the questions, because I'm an engineer as well.
Oh, you are? I
And
did not know that.
Yes.
Wow,
Yes.
what did you study?
I am Georgia Tech.
Well, good for you. Good for you. That's a great school. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, I'm so biased. I bleed Georgia Tech. So
Oh,
in fact, my day job, I run commercialization efforts for medical technologies that are coming out of Georgia Tech and Emory, and helping
Really?
those teams learn to drive towards commercializing, so that their research that is so critical that it actually gets out of the bench and gets to the patient or to the doctor or to the nurses. So it's actually making a huge impact in life. And I
Great.
love what I do and work
Great.
with teams from Georgia Tech and Emory. So yes.
Nice.
So when you said that, one of the things that I like to say, I'm on the College of Engineering board at Georgia Tech. I'm also on the board to the president. And when I'm talking to engineers, I tell them the beauty of being an engineer is if you learn how to solve problems,
Yes.
that is the core. That's all I care about. If you know as an engineer how to solve problems, you can pivot at any stage in your life. You can
Right.
decide what you want to do, because there are problems in every industry, every walk of life, groups, teams, individuals, everything. So I love that you have an engineering brain.
Right. Well, you know what? And I tell you, I think everybody should study engineering because I've noticed that we don't have a lot of great critical thinking around, and it's
Yes.
so important. And actually, I mentor students at Butler University here in Indianapolis, or I used to. And one summer I was involved in a summer work project where we looked at business students all over the country and their critical thinking skills. They're awful. And every year, business schools take more and more math out of their curriculum. And there's a direct correlation with math and critical thinking. And
Totally agree.
yeah,
Absolutely.
it's really there. So, well, that's exciting. Well,
Yes.
my father, actually, I have to tell you, I was actually just down in Georgia. And my father and my mother, who's now just died recently,
Oh, I'm
they live
sorry.
thank you. They live in Athens, Georgia.
Okay.
So you're different
Well,
school, but I get that
we
Georgia.
call that school the community college up in Athens.
Oh,
Full story. Full story. University of Georgia is an amazing school, has an amazing
Yes.
program.
Right.
However, I have to be loyal to Georgia Tech, so we just call it that community college up there.
that's funny. That's funny. That's funny. It's a great school. I mean, it's such spirit. It's such spirit. So yeah.
Yes. Yes.
My
Yes.
yeah.
What school did you go to?
Well, I went to a very small engineering school, and I was a very early adopter. I was the first woman in the division of General
Look at
Motors that was
you.
an engineer. So I was a very pioneer, and I went to a very small school in northern Indiana called Tri-State. It's
Okay.
now called Trine, but there were only 1,000 students. And so what was beautiful about that is I really feel like I got a great education, and I felt so supported. And so, yeah, but I was the very first woman in I might have been in the entire division. There were 60,000
Wow.
people. So, yeah, so it was
I
an
love
interesting,
this.
yeah, it was an interesting, yeah, it was interesting. And because, like you, I grew up with two brothers and a father that was an engineer, I was very
Yep.
comfortable in that environment. So that was not a hard transition for me at all. But yeah, so interesting. So interesting.
So I can picture being an engineer doing this leadership stuff as well. Appreciate
Yeah.
the value and the transition for that. But I want to hear about how did you get into Aikido? Did I pronounce that correctly? Because I've been
Yes, you did.
practicing. Yes,
That is
score.
it. That is right. Well, so I'm not going to go into great depth on this, but many, many years ago, I read a story that was called A Kind Word Turneth Away Wrath. And a lot of times I tell that story, but it takes more time than I want to take right now. But it's really about a guy that was an American that was in Japan studying this art called Aikido. And he was on a train and there was some disruption that happened. And, in Aikido, we're taught not to fight. He who has a mind to fight has broken his connection with the universe. And so, but he's in this situation where he's thinking, if I don't do something, somebody's going to really get hurt. And what's interesting is right as he started to kind of taunt this person so that guy would make the first move, this little Japanese man just yelled, "Hey, what you been drinking?" to the guy that was causing the disruption. And it totally shifted everything. And anyway, he talked a lot about Aikido and how it evolved through many, many other martial arts. And so when you watch martial arts, and if you have an eye for locks and throws and all that, the most recent Mission Impossible, there's a lot of stuff I recognize in that because it's stuff that we do, but we have a different intent behind it. So the founder of Aikido is considered to be one of the finest martial artists of all times. And he studied and taught a lot of different arts. But midlife, he started to think, I'm teaching these arts that are all about hurting people, maybe even killing people. And it's totally contrary to my values. And so he actually took a break and he went on a retreat in the mountains. And his quest was to try to find the true martial art. And so through all that experience, he came back and he says, I found the true martial art, and it is love. And so he started practicing with a different intention. His intention was to nurture his attacker's life as well as his own. So it came to be called Aikido because it's spelled AI, which is harmony or blending, Ki, which is energy or universal energy, and Do is the way of life. So it's the way of life through the harmonizing of energy. And a lot of times people will say to me, oh, I know what that's like. That's like when you use the attacker's energy against them. And I say, no, 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 no. That would be judo. Aikido, we're not using it against. We're using it to diffuse and shift and move. That's what we're doing. And so it's not an art in which you harm and you go against. And so when people say that, I always want to correct and say, now you might find some Aikido teachers that say that, but I think they're missing the originating principle of it personally. So, yeah.
Well, I love also, I'm hearing this.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, okay, I can see how someone who has an engineering brain knows how to solve complex problems.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
then has training in an art that teaches how to have this balance and how to bring things together would be such huge skills towards conflict. So tell me now, let's talk about the Spiral Impact, the book that we have right here.
Wow.
You see, I have notes for it. And
I love that. I love that.
Well. So one of the things that I wanted to read from the beginning, because I also love the use of the word grace. I think that, and I'm going to read what you have in the foreword of your book about this. And so let me read it first and then I'll say. So this book's subtitle, The Power to Get It Done with Grace, is standing the test of time. You may think power and grace in the same sentence are contradictory, partly because you may have been led to believe something different about power, which I think is so true. With 3 decades of consistent practice in Aikido, I know that understanding the difference between power and force, I love the physics of this. Okay. Power and force is a key to getting out of struggle, both on the mat and in your life. So let's talk about how you used all of your engineering and your Aikido to develop this method that's been so successful.
Yeah. So, force, and I'm going to just make this really simple. So to all of your audience, whatever, you can relate to. So force is a straight line. So we spent a lot of time doing vector equations in engineering school. And it's Newton's law of cause and effect is you have one force equalizes with another force and all of that stuff. And that's a lot of how a lot of people will lead, actually, is they use force. And force looks like using statements, telling people what to do. It's that anger piece. And I often use the analogy of a hammer and a nail. And if you've ever been in a situation where you're trying to get somebody to do something and you feel like all you do is you're hammering away, and you keep doing the same frigging thing over and over and over, and nothing changes. It's because you're using force. And if you're a parent, you know that very true, because kids will teach you all of that very well. And so
They will.
so anyway, but on the other hand, power, and I'm talking about true power.
Well, and also, like, real quick, that force thing, the first thing I was just thinking about is also because we know that forces end up having two that, are coming, is that we forget that the harder we push on one side, the natural reaction of physics is the harder it's going to push on the other side.
Exactly. So it's just universally true until we take it to a different level. And I want to talk to that as well. And I don't talk to the next level as much in my book as I will maybe in my next book. But power is rotational. And so if we go back to if what I'm doing is joining boards together, I can use a hammer and a nail. And we've probably all done that, I think. And you've probably hit your thumb with a nail, with a hammer, and you've probably bent nails because that's force and it's destructive. But if you want to use power, you're going to use a screw and a screwdriver. And that's rotational. So there's a tiny bit of force to start, and then you rotate it. And it's really stable. It's very easy. It's much easier to use. Nobody's going to get hurt. And the best thing about that is that you get a really good long-term result because you have all that surface area contact. And the same is true with our communication. But let me give a few other examples for people, because you might think a gun is force, but actually in the shaft of a gun is a spiral, which is what puts
Yeah.
that power behind that bullet. Football, which I know Georgia's more into football than in the United. We're more basketball up here, but
Well, also UGA is better at football right now than
football,
Georgia
yeah. Well,
Tech,
there we go.
but
So, but
maybe not
anyway,
for long.
well, and my 93-year-old dad, he was telling me last fall, he said, Karen, you should be teaching your stuff to football teams. And I'm like, yeah, well, I'm happy to. So, but that football, you put a spiral on it and it takes it down the field. The heart is a spiral. It's a pump that's very efficient in how it moves. So when you look at the universe, things that are powerful are spirals. Now we mistake power a lot of times people in power will actually use force to get their point across. And
Yes.
that's still force. And so really the essence of this work is being able to distinguish the difference between force and power. Because force is who's ever in a dominant position, and usually people that see themselves as less than you, whether it's their position in their work, whether it's their psychological or their emotional prowess, will rarely attack you. And and usually when they attack you, they're using force. And so when you can learn to use power, then it shifts things. And so I know your listeners are probably thinking, yeah, but how do you do that? Right? And so in Aikido, what happens when a fist comes toward me, I move slightly offline and into it. And when I do that, I don't block that force. I let it go by me. And then I shift with it. And there's some videos on my website and on YouTube and stuff. But what you end up doing is you shift your position so you're no longer going force against force. You're guiding their movement in a different direction. And what happens in real life is it's so powerful because because people aren't expecting it. People are not expecting you to move in and with. They might expect you to retreat, but we're not talking about retreating. We're talking about staying with and moving in. And so it's a very different dynamic. And it's fascinating the whole study for me is really fascinating because we talk a lot about nonverbal communication, and really I think the research, and people throw so much stuff out on the internet, unless you research it, it's hard to know whether it's true or not. But
Right.
I understand that what I was always taught was that 95% of our communication is nonverbal. And so that all that accounts in there in terms of where you are. So if I'm talking too fast or too much, let me know.
Well, no, but I want to say something really quick. And also, I'm not shy. I'll just jump in.
Okay, great.
Listeners probably hate when I do this. But anyway, I was just thinking about going back to your hammer and screw analogy. Okay, so I am a blacksmith. I'm also a beekeeper. So I've done a lot of, yes, I've also done a lot of hammering. And for example, our bee boxes, I screw them all together for reasons. But I'm thinking about, okay, let's not talk about power screwdrivers. Let's just talk about holding a regular screwdriver.
Right, exactly.
And a hammer. And I think the reason that initially we get those individuals like JD or whoever who are resistant to learning these things is because it takes more time. It takes more time to take a handheld screwdriver and screw a screw in that's going to do a better job, last longer, line up better, be way more resilient, all of these things, way longer to do that than it does to hold a nail and smack it a few times with a hammer that you can do very quickly. But we know with the hammer and the nail, the straight of that nail that just goes in and doesn't bring all the team members together for that, then if something happens, it easily pops off. And you're actually worse off than you were before because now you have this extra hole and now you're trying to find another spot to put it in and all of these things. So all the individuals who think I don't want to work through a methodology in conflict that's going to take a little longer. And we're going to talk about your quadrants for your spiral.
Yeah.
They're like, I want to just do the hammer and the nail because I'll get there. However, it's that whole story. Just doing it right the first time saves you so much time.
Well, and I tell you, I have a story. I think it's in my book, and I had a client once, and to put this in a business context, had a client that actually brought me out several years in a row to do leadership training, and then after one training, he said to me, "Oh, by the way, we need to get a new CFO, and I'm going to hire this guy that's in his team." Now, what's funny is, and then he looked at me because I know my face fell on the floor because this guy that he was going to hire was the person.
So
that
you don't play poker either, right? You don't play because I can't play poker.
I can't
Everything
lie.
in my face.
I cannot lie. I cannot lie. So, but it was interesting because exactly the same function, which was he says, "I know what you're thinking. He doesn't seem like a fit philosophically, but he says, I know him. He's here. He's available." It's the hammer. I mean, you might think of that differently, but it's that quick thing.
Nope, it's
that we
exactly.
do. Quick thing that we do, and that guy ended up making some decisions, and the whole thing just fell apart. Almost the entire place fell apart, and certainly my client lost his job. And I mean, it was really an ugly thing. But absolutely right. It does take longer, but it's actually shorter. I mean, it is one of those things.
It's shorter than redoing because then what they had to do is they had to then hire somebody else. They had to fix all of the toxic damage that was done by what was an easy and to be clear, listeners, I've hired a lot of people, and every hiring manager makes mistakes.
Yes.
And we have those instances where we ignore our gut, and then we hire someone who are like, why did I do that? So this is, but it's a great example. Yeah. Because what was the light? Oh, go for it.
Because but there was already so much known about this person already.
Right.
So, which we knew was not, on
both sides. Yeah, he'll be easy to onboard because he already knows the system. Whatever, he's going to jump in and be immediately effective and all of these things.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what was your light bulb moment when you suddenly realized, because I've done a lot of conflict research. I've never heard of this idea of the spiral, and I love it. Mm-hmm. And so what was that light bulb moment that you said, wait, here is something that's really impactful?
Okay, so there's kind of two light bulbs moments for me. One was when I first saw Aikido, and I'll tell you, it was at a dental conference. And the man
dental conference?
Yeah, my kid's dad he was a periodontist. He's retired now, but so we used to go to this dental conference out in the Rockies that was all dentists, but it wasn't anything about dentistry specifically. It was all personal growth and practice management kind of stuff. And so there was a man there, and when I saw his credentials, I immediately knew that's where I'm going to be hanging out. And his name is Tom Crum. He's now retired, but he wrote a book many years ago in the 70s that's called The Magic of Conflict, which is a great book. And he's an Aikidoist. And so he did a demonstration. And, when he did that demonstration, I watched and I got it. I got how dysfunctional I was in conflict because I could see it. It was like, I see what I do, and I am so ineffective. And that was a light bulb moment for me when I first decided I'm going to segue out of engineering, and this stuff is so important. I had no support from anybody close to me when I made that decision. I mean, that's part of partly was what triggered my marriage ending was I had no support. My parents were like, why would you do that? I mean, why would you? You're an engineer.
Right, exactly. You're an engineer. They're the coolest.
Yeah, right. But then the other thing.
By the way, you're still an engineer. So
right. You're always right. It's exactly. So, but the other light bulb moment for me was when I was practicing Aikido. And I was on the mat one night, and, for me, I think for most people, when you're doing something physical, oftentimes your mind just is open up in a different way for ideas. And I was practicing because I felt like I was doing my version of Tom's work at that point, and I'd been doing it for about 10 years, and it was, it was good. It was really good stuff, but I felt like there was something missing. And so I was sitting there and I was thinking, well, what do people want? People want to do what they love, and they want to do it with some ease and grace. That's what people
Yes.
want. And then I was just reflecting on this. I mean, it was really, I don't think if I really worked at this, I could have created this, but it really came to me when I was practicing. And I thought, well, what do people want? People, yeah, they want to do what they love, and what do they need to do that? Well, and that gets us into the quadrants. And so what do they need to know? They need to have knowledge. And now this is a 30,000 foot viewpoint, but they need to have knowledge about themselves, about whatever it is that they're working with or on. They need to have knowledge about the people that they work with, the other people. And then when you get into a team dynamic, a team is very different. They take their own complexion rather than just you or another person. So there's all that knowledge that you've got to become the learner on all of it. You've got to have focused energy. The next quadrant, and I hesitate to say second, just because they're not.
Okay, I want you to define something before we go into what your 4 quadrants are. Okay. So sorry, listeners. I mean, seriously, you could pause and buy your book on Amazon and then follow along if you want and see all the quadrants. But sorry, we're going to pause for a moment because I love this part on page 9 when you define conflict. And you're saying in here, a difference becomes a conflict when you choose to push against the difference. The word conflict, and you talk about it's derived in Latin root from meaning together and strike. So conflict means to strike together. It can be experienced as creative tension or destructive tension. I want you to walk us through that because I love this level setting that so many people think conflict is this, but it's really not.
Right. And again, as an engineer would, I get back to the basics. And so all your listeners, if you're not driving, take your fists and push them together. And
I'm going to do it
because
because I'm not driving.
You're not
so I'll model
driving.
this.
So
No.
yeah, so you're going to push together. Guess what? That's conflict. That is conflict. And this is what happens. And as we talked earlier, the harder you push, the more hard you get back. And so this happens, and it becomes conflict depending on how hard, how fast, or how long this push goes on. Because and that's where it gets tricky, because some people can handle a lot of this. I mean, some people, you can come in and just dress them down, and they're like, "Thank you." I aspire to be that way, and I'm pretty much that way. But I am still sensitive. But what's interesting is you could raise your voice slightly with another person, and they could melt on a puddle on the floor. So how much you push, because the creative conflict is that you push just right for the people involved to get engagement. And that's the tricky part. The purpose is to bring forth the best ideas, to engage people. Whereas the purpose of dysfunctional conflict is to make wrong, destroy, or even defeat in some way. So our purpose is very different. And so that push, and this is something I pay a lot of attention to in my life, because when I feel like I'm pushing, I shift. And actually what I want to do is I want to spiral. So if you did this push with another person, all one of you have to do is open your hand and you spiral in, and it releases that tension, and then you get movement. And so that's the key to all of
Which is different than just going along with somebody else.
Right.
Because I think going along with someone else probably looks more like this.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
But then that spiral is creating what is going to be that masterpiece that you want to have.
Right. It's not about giving up. And I use the analogy of if maybe one person wants, I think I use the colors blue and green. One person is convinced that blue is the end all of everything. This is how we got to do it. Whereas another person may say, no, it's the green way, and they stay here. They're stuck at their level of position is what they are. And and it's interesting too is when you're thinking of, if you're in conflict with somebody, the more you push them, the more they dig their heels in. And so the
Yes.
more they've been pushed, the more they are resistant to even hearing you. And so, and you know, that nonverbal stuff, it doesn't have to be overt. People can feel it. So if you're a spiral impact person, you know that one of the things you want to do is ask questions. You know, that's that going in the circles. I want to get off of my position, off of my point of view and onto a viewing point. And that's where I can see the world as the other person's looking. And so what does that look like? I might say, well, tell me about your experience with blue. You know, have you tried this with blue? So now I'm becoming the learner about, so they're really married to blue. Now, instead of discounting it as not as good as green, I want to learn about it, because when I learn about it, then I can have a conversation. And what's so beautiful about that is when you start talking with somebody and they're no longer having to resist to protect their turf, that creates an opening for them to ask you about green. So it's really quite magical how that works.
I was trying to find, I was looking for where I highlighted, because you said something about, I love the approach. I was going to say tactic. I don't like the word tactic in this instance, because I think that maybe is not that, but I love the approach of connecting and asking questions, because, and also understanding the way things feel in your body. And there's a section here where you talk about body reaction, you know, where you're in conflict, because, and this is page 129, you have increased heart rate, tension in the stomach and neck, disagreement, feelings of struggle, and a situation different from what you desire. So I think it's really important that us as we as humans understand that feeling. But the other thing is, you just said, if I'm trying to force blue on you and you're the green girl, then, right? So you're like, no, Angela, green. And I'm like, no, blue. Then your brain is no longer thinking about anything other than proving that green is the right one. But if I pause and I start asking you those questions, then the other thing that's magical about it is your body relaxes a little. Your brain goes out of that fight or flight mode, and you get into this situation where you also start thinking about it. And oftentimes when you're walking through those questions is when the green person is like, ultimately, you know what? Never mind, maybe blue. I mean, my podcast studio is blue. So that's why I said I was a blue girl, dear friend. But yeah, it also offers that opportunity for the other person to feel heard, to feel seen, to not be pushed down, and to open up their mind again.
Yeah, because, I really believe at the end of the day, we all want to be seen and heard.
Yes.
We do. And I think that's why we see such conflict in our country right now, is I think there's been people that have not been seen and heard. And they're all valid. And I love people. I honor people. And I use every opportunity I can to look someone in the eye and talk with them, because it's like, how are they experiencing the world today? I mean, it's a wonderful thing. But
share the car example that you share in the book, because also I'm on this mission in the world for people to understand that it is okay to let someone in. It is not going to delay your trip to your office by 10 minutes to let someone in. But share that story, because that is a connecting.
Okay, so traffic is a great thing. And, I just came back from a road trip from Georgia, and I was in traffic, and I love to study how people are in traffic. But if you are trying to pull out onto a busy road and you don't have a stoplight or a stop sign, there's just this flow of traffic, and it just keeps going. I always ask people, what do you know works to get somebody to let you in? Think about it, everybody. Just think about it for a second. Well, what we know works is if you make eye contact with them. Because, if you don't make eye contact with them and you just try to squeeze in, and I'm pretty calm, but if someone tries to just squeeze in front of me without any kind of communication, I want to ram them. No. I still have that in me. I'm like, how dare you
Don't use your car force at them.
Right, exactly. I used to drive this old Chevrolet when I first started driving, and sometimes I wish I had that old bomb, but no, I mean, I'm really not. But, but if you've ever experienced this, if you roll your window down and you make eye contact, they will let you in. It never fails. If they don't want to let you in, they know you're there, and they just won't look at you. So you wait to the next person. But it's one of those things. It's about connection, and and so often we forget about that connection in our work. And I've done a lot of work in hospitals. And one time I had a physician say to me, and this is in my book as well. She said, my biggest conflict is I go down to that lab and I tell the lab tech I need this sample done in the next couple hours or whatever it is. And the lab tech will say, well, that's just too bad, right? That's just too bad. And I'm thinking, gosh, it really happens. It really happens. And,
yes.
And so now
I've seen this.
The doctor thinks, how disrespectful of that person. But what's happened there is there's none of that connection. There's none of that connection that happens. And so, how do you make the connection? It's like, good morning, Amy. Or good morning, what's your name? Something that's just not just I need this lab tech. Because one of the keys of applying this is to get rid of your statements, because statements keep us stuck. And she was saying, I need this done by today. And the lab tech statements are like a force, and they meet with force. And so you stay stuck there. If she just asked a question, tell me more about, tell me how's your workload? I've heard that things are really busy down here. What's it like? That's a way you can acknowledge and ask a question, and you create connection, because now you're learning and acknowledging how the world looks to them. And you will get a different answer. You will get a different answer. Now, if you have some past history where you've been kind of a little bit of a not very nice person, a Karen maybe. It's really been hard.
You can say that because that's your name.
I know. It's like, what I do now is I tell people that they can remember my name because I'm Karen, and I'm on a mission to make people realize that Karens are actually, most of them I've ever met are really wonderful people. So right, anyway, right. but it's asking that question and acknowledging somebody, because again, we're all human. We all want to be seen. We all want to be heard.
It's back to that want to be seen. Yes.
We want to be seen. We want to be heard. We want to be appreciated for what we're doing. And in our busyness, we forget that. And it's
there's power in building the relationship, and also knowing you don't always need things urgently.
Right.
But when you are known as the person who always needs it right now, right, then you're going to get it a lot slower.
Right.
Than when you're the person that comes in and is like, hey, you guys are swamped. Okay, good news is this sample tomorrow is totally fine.
Right.
And then you come in another day and you say, oh my goodness, I feel really bad about this, but you guys are really busy and I really need this sample. Is there anything I can do to help navigate to make this happen?
Right.
I'll bring you Chick-fil-A biscuits tomorrow.
Right. Exactly. It's, it really is. It's fast.
Okay, so your quadrant, I'll let you go back to your quadrants. Yes, it is so simple.
Yeah. So, and when we think about these quadrants, and I'm going to say the first actually, I always say 5 steps, but you got to first recognize when you've got conflict, and how does that show up for you, and that's really important to know. And I think that when you recognize that you're going down that road, or that you've gone down that road, is really key, because I have done some things before and I realize I catch it afterward, or even something that wasn't intentional. Like I was doing a big project and I sent the final report to this group of people, but I neglected to copy the main person because it was a reply all kind of thing. And I thought, when I learned that, it was just like I could feel myself sweating. I mean, because I thought, oh my God, he thinks I've dropped the ball on this. But all I did was, I guess, went out, I acknowledged him, and I, asked a question. It was just, I just went forward with it. So it's always that. But asking those questions and acknowledging, I think about that when you think about a spiral. There's three components of a spiral. There's the part that goes around, and that is what we're doing. We're asking questions. We're increasing our knowledge about whatever it is. And that's through acknowledgement and asking questions and being the learner rather than the authority. And I find even when I've done this for a long time, I have a lot of authority with my work, but I ask a lot of questions because I don't want to assume that people, and I also find sometimes someone in authority can make statements that people will push against. Like, for example, someone will say, well, we all know that this is true. And
I hate that phrase.
I do.
Hate that
like,
phrase.
we all know. I didn't know that. I mean, it's like for me,
This all people.
we all know it's making a statement that may or may not be true, and so then it goes within a person, and you're thinking, well, am I less than? I didn't know that, but it creates those things, and so there's the going around, which is the knowledge piece, and then there's also, when you think about power, I often use a picture of a hurricane or a tornado, because in the middle of that, there's the eye. There's a calm eye in the middle of that spiral. And that is the next quadrant, which I call focused energy. And a 30,000-foot viewpoint of that is what I call choosing to be centered. And centering is a big umbrella for a lot of things. But in the martial arts, it's really about being balanced, physically, spiritually, emotionally balanced. And when I work with people in person, I actually have a little exercise I do where I'll just have someone come up and I'll just push on them, and they tend to wobble. And then I have them put their focus at their center point, and their center point is in their gut. It's about 1.5 inches below their navel. And so if they focus there, and you'll notice this in your own life, they focus there and I push on them, they're much more stable. And so what I do is I teach people, there's a lot of ways of getting centered, but when you're centered, you have a perspective and a confidence, and not an arrogant confidence, but you have a knowingness that is very calm and present. And you're not as reactive, and you notice things that you wouldn't notice otherwise. So it's a very powerful place to be. And there's a lot of ways to get there. And I encourage people to choose something that works for them. And I think breathing is probably the most accessible for people. And I do have a download that's like you put your seatbelt over your center in your car and breathe. It's that simple. When you're driving,
I'm going to try that today.
Yeah, don't put your hands at 2 and 4. Were you taught that 2 and 4?
I was taught 2 and 4, and my daughter was not taught 2 and 4. I don't remember if she was taught 10 and 3 or what she was taught.
Well, yeah, because now since we have airbags, and see
Right.
goes to show that once we've had airbags, it's dangerous to have your hands up here. It's also very uncentering and tense. For people listening or watching, just raise your shoulders up. It throws you off balance, and so you want to have your hands at, I think, 4 o'clock and probably 7 or 8 o'clock. And you drive from there, and it just makes you more centered. So it's just a walking or running, and I like to use the example as if you go watch a marathon, the people that are winning look like they're being pulled from a rope from their hara, their center, whereas the people at the back are working with their shoulders. They're not very aligned and all of that. So the way you move physically through the world makes a difference. Stairs are a place I noticed when I started this work, I would walk upstairs with my shoulders. Now I use my lower body. Pushing a cart or a lawnmower, move from your hips rather than your shoulders. So it's a lot of physical stuff. And of course, that's what we do in Aikido. But there's also things I ask people to think about in their memories, which is, think of a time in your life where you felt you could do anything. You just had such awareness. Things were brighter seeming, sounds were very poignant, and there was just this air about you that you felt really empowered and can do. And for me, that's Muir Woods. I go in my brain back to Muir Woods, and your mind doesn't know the difference whether you're there or not. So if you recall those experiences and make them really rich with sensation on your skin, with sounds that you hear, smells. Muir Woods. There's that smell of the earth, and there's birds singing, and it can just take you back to that place. So I think that because we talk about asking questions, but a lot of times when you're in conflict, you're not thinking, oh, let me ask a question. But as you develop your center, it puts you in a situation where you can think faster on your feet. And that's what the power of that is. And it gives you that sixth sense of what's going on, so you can think about, what do I not know here? How can I ask a question? And it'll give you a different perspective on things too, because someone could be really angry, and you might be able to be in a situation where you might see it's kind of funny how they're yelling at you. No, so
Right. You know what I think my favorite question is?
What's that?
Is especially if it's if I can tell it's like a heated or I can tell by the body language, because I watch people's body language so much.
Yeah.
And if I can tell that they're raising their voice, they're talking faster, they're getting more tense, they're leaning more in, they're doing all these signs, right?
Yeah.
And I realize they're really engaged in what they're saying. And so my favorite thing to do is say, okay, I understand this is real. I see this is really important to you. Tell me more.
Yeah.
So you don't have to think about a brilliant question. Just tell me more.
I use tell me more all the time. Wow, that's
my favorite.
Fascinating. Tell me more. Yeah, I use that all the time. It's a fantastic, yeah. And what's so nice, I don't know about you, but when I was going to engineering school, I was worried I'd have to have all the answers.
Yes.
And my dad told me, well, we don't really, we work in teams, Karen. You don't have to have all the answers. But I think that's really something with groups too, is I don't want to show up with the answer because they've got a better answer than I have because they know their stuff, right? Yeah.
Right. So how do you, I'm picturing this, and I've read the book, so I know, but the listeners do not know. Okay. So when I think of, we've talked about spiral, and you can see the image on the front of the book of spiral. And then you also have what I find is very interesting, these quadrants in here that we're talking about. So you have 4 quadrants that tie into it. And when I think of quadrants, my brain just goes into hard, stiff corners, the opposite of spiral. So can you talk about how you came up with these quadrants and how the two of them go together?
Okay, so if you look at that picture, in the middle of the quadrants is a spiral. And so what it is you quadrant shift. So you go from one quadrant to the next. So I tell people, so here you are, you're in a conflict, you get it, you're struggling. So pick a quadrant. Pick any
And
quadrant.
Now, listeners, we're finally going to tell you what the quadrants are. So go ahead and listen to the quadrants
are. The quadrants are, the first one is knowledge. And we talked about that. You start asking questions and acknowledging. So you're increasing your knowledge. The second quadrant is focused energy. So you've got to get yourself centered and performing. And and again, this is 30,000 foot viewpoint. There's a lot more to that. Don't drink a lot of alcohol when you've got a big conflict going on. I mean, there's a lot of get good sleep. I mean, there's all those kind of things that go in that. Now, another one of the quadrants, and again, getting back to that idea of a spiral, and that picture is 2-dimensional, but another quadrant is intention. And that's the quadrant that most people.
Oh, that was my favorite.
That was the quadrant. In conflict, so often people leave out intention. And I tell you what, I make some good money when people call me up and say, we have got such conflict here. We have such conflict and every time we get together to try to hash it out, we just gets worse. People cry. They don't want to show up. It's awful. And I say, well, what have you done? And they say, well, we just get together and we just try to hash it out. We just have to hash it out. And I said, well, I can help you then. Because I know when you try to hash out a problem, it gets worse. It always gets worse. And that's what most people do, is they focus on the problem. Intention is we focus on where are we going? And that's the thing that gives instead of going in circles, which is the knowledge and the center, the intention gives it a direction. And so I think the direction, and spirals are powerful, and when people hear the word that you're spiraling, oftentimes they think that you're going down the drain is an awful thing, but that's only because they're powerful, and you can reshift that spiral in a different direction. But you've got to be conscious of doing that, and that comes with intention. And there's a lot of layers of intention. Yeah, a lot of layers.
The reason I loved intention so much is that one of my other favorite techniques in conflict is and I had this happen this past week where I was suddenly thrown into a meeting that I thought was focused on a fundraising thing, and it was really focused on something I had no idea about, and I was just like, wow. And so I said, okay, how about we do this? How about let's just pause for a moment. You tell me, what does success look like at the end of this journey? And I think that is, and people love to talk about, but we forget to pause in our conversations and say, wait a minute, what does success really look like?
Right.
And that ties to the intention.
Exactly. Yeah. Where are we going? We're in this thing. And actually, you know what? I had this with my dad over the weekend. He's 93, has an email he hasn't used for years, but he couldn't get to it. And he wanted me to help him. He can't see very well. He can't walk very well, but his mind is bright as can be. And he's convinced that his computer is slow because there's too many emails, but he can't get into the emails because his computer's 13 years old and it's not updating. And so anyway, he wanted me to get in there so he could delete all the emails because he's convinced they're taking up space and making his computer slow. And I told him, I said, Dad, that's not what's happening. He says, well, it has to be. And I said, Dad, it's not. And I said, but tell me, what do you want to do? Why is it that you want this? Because I could spend my entire day here visiting with you, messing around with this. But at the end of the day, you have an email you want to delete. And so spending the time doing this doesn't make any sense. But that's an example of where are we going for here? And what are we going to do? And I think so often, particularly in this world we're in right now, there's so many distractions that can take you down all these wormholes that you really got to step back and say, where's this taking me? And how much time is this taking me? And is it really getting me to the end I want to get? And that's something I'm continually asking myself as a business owner and a content creator. It's something that you can spend days and days and days doing something that doesn't get you where you want to go. So, yeah, intention.
Okay, so we've covered 3. We've covered knowledge, focused energy, and intention. And before you say what the 4th one was, I will say they're all my favorite. So now listeners are going to be like, you already said that was your favorite. You can't say, but they're all my favorite. And the reason that the last one, I'm not going to say the word, is my favorite is because you recommend people to read books and listen to podcasts.
I do. Yeah. The last one is about support. What's your support? And, and there's so much available now with support. In terms of podcast, in terms of online learning, there's just so much support that you can have. But I also recommend that people have trusted advisors in their life. I have probably 3 people, not probably, I do have 3 people that I have relationship enough with that I can talk through things with them, and they're not going to judge me. They're not going to tell me what to do. They're going to ask me good questions, and that support is priceless. And so having that kind of support, whether it's a coach or a mentor or just good friends, it's so keenly important. And then having the right equipment to do whatever you're trying to do is also really important. So you can spend a lot of time, even getting back to the screwdriver example, having a power screwdriver can save you a lot of time rather than
the bomb
by hand. Yeah, right, exactly. So having the right tools. Yeah, so all those things, I think you can accomplish so much when you incorporate all of those things, those 4 quadrants, and it's interesting because I always tell people, and I've worked with people that will circle back with me years later, and they'll say, Karen, I've got this thing. I've got this thing going on. And I always say, well, let's go back to the model. Let's go back to the model. So where have you been? And if you do it, it works. And I know when
Yes.
when something's not working for me, it's I've left something out. And so
I love this.
yeah, that's the thing. So you
Okay,
got,
so a couple of things. We
okay.
focus a lot on this podcast between really trying to understand what different badass leaders think. The
Yeah.
difference between a manager and a leader is, and everyone has a different perspective. I'm dying to know, especially now in your career after doing this for 30 years, what your thoughts are on a leader versus a manager.
I kind of go to it might even be antiquated, but I tend to think of leadership around vision and people and inspiration and all of that. Whereas I think of management is around tasks and doing things. And so you can have a manager that is both a leader and a manager. And also you can have a leader that also can manage, but sometimes leaders need to keep their hands out of the management depending on how they're set up. But I see a leader is someone that brings people up and really really helps people grow, and their actions are very much spiral impact. I had an experience. I was showing up for a speaking engagement, and I was in the lobby of the hotel, and I was waiting in line to check in, and there was a small group of people in front of me, and this one young woman, she was so angry. She was so angry, and she was telling her coworkers, she said, I was brought here to do photography for this convention, and he is telling me everything to do. He's telling me everything to do, like I don't know anything. And it was just, so her leader, her boss, I don't know what his position was, so he hired somebody that had this expertise. And he could have said to her, I really value what you bring to the table. What do you think's important when you look at this project? This is what we want in the end. That's, again, the intention.
What success is. What success looks like is this.
Yeah, and so how would you go about doing this? What is it that you would do? And that would make her feel empowered. She wouldn't be sitting there bad-mouthing him to all her coworkers. So, I mean, it's leaders have got to be really careful with that kind of stuff and really lift up the people that work for them and trust. It's not that you just say blindly, go figure that out. You want to check in, particularly if you don't know somebody very well or if they're new, but always asking first, how would you go about doing this?
The beauty of that too, yes, and the beauty of that is that photographer now is going to do so much better of a job.
Right.
Because you're unlocking their ability to tap into the creative part of their brain.
Right.
When you as a manager, you're just like, this is the task, go do X, Y, and Z, right? Then the person who's doing those things, they shut down the creative part of their brain, and you don't have that innovation and growth.
Right, exactly. I heard Mary Barra speak once. She's I don't know if people know who she is. She's the CEO of General Motors Corporation. I really admire her a lot because she came up through the similar kind of background as I did. She started out as an engineer, and then she became the CEO. But she was speaking at the Indy 500, our 100th anniversary. She was invited to town, and when I heard it, I went immediately. But one of the questions that she was asked is, what do you do with all these young people that think they know everything when they come into the organization? And she laughed, and she said, we love our young people. And she said, if they don't bring it up, we are always asking them, what are we doing that's dumb? What are we doing that's dumb? Powerful question, because when you ask it, you're saying, I know there's things we're doing that are dumb. I just don't know what they are. And please tell us what they are. So you're inviting that critical thinking and a platform that people can say, we're doing this. And I don't get it. And I had a group I was working with in a hospital, and it was interesting because I asked that for this team. And this one woman said, we have people manning the phones in this department till 7 o'clock in the evening. The phone never rings after 5 o'clock, but we do this. We've been doing this for years. And it turned out whatever it was for wasn't happening anymore. So things change over time, but we don't change our processes to adapt to them. So anyway,
I love that. Okay,
Yeah.
so now let's talk about we've talked a couple of times throughout this journey we've had today about really showing our humanity, that we're humans, right? And we make mistakes. And
Right.
that can be hard to see because we often have blind spots.
Oh,
What
yeah.
would you say some common blind spots you see even in great leaders?
I think a lot of times we can assume that we know what the other people are thinking. I think we can assume. I think we can assume other people's motivations and what they're thinking. I think that's the biggest blind spot. And I know I can get in that too. If I think and it's that making a snap judgment based upon a person's background, their appearance, their, where they work, and I think making assumptions about whether we agree or not. And I've seen some really interesting things revealed over time where there's just really a mismatch. And people that know each other really well, I think can get really trapped into that because they think they know each other so well they can complete each other's sentences. They don't. And if you've ever been in a relationship like that and caught yourself, you'll know that you don't. And it's really fascinating to me. So I think making assumptions about people that you know well and people that you don't know so well is, and I think it's an easy thing to do, and I think it's very dangerous actually. So yeah.
Well, also, I think that ties to one of the blind spots I often see in even amazing leaders,
Yeah.
tying to your assumptions,
Yeah.
is that they assume on the first pass they understood what everyone was saying and what they meant.
Yes.
And I love going back once again to Brene Brown. I learned this technique. Maybe it was from her vulnerability video that she did or something. But the art of saying, okay, I really want to make sure I fully understand this. So when you said this, the story in my head, what I think you said is this. Am I on the right track?
Right.
And then they say, no, that's not what I meant. And I'm like, okay, great. I'm glad I asked. Now tell me again. And you do that exercise until you make sure, you don't assume you're on the same page, but you make sure, okay, got it. Now we're finally on the same page.
Right. Absolutely. You're right. Because as leaders, and I find it pretty amazing how I can go into a group, they have a meeting, and then they depart, and nobody really talks about, well, what's anybody doing? What's the follow-up?
Right.
It's just kind of the same thing. What are we understanding? What are we taking away from this meeting? But you're absolutely right, and I think I think we kind of both can. I teach feedback a little bit differently than some people, which is I always start feedback with questions because I don't. We're sometimes giving feedback to somebody and we have no idea what they're dealing with on their end, and we're just making assumptions about what they're because they did this must be what their problem is, right? And so and when I work with leaders, and I had a gal a few years ago, she had a person that was just really breaking. And they had these really difficult conversations. They came to agreement around what was going to change. She wrote it out, and it wasn't a punitive thing. It was just like we're writing this out so that we have it documented and we both agree to it, and they both agree to it all. But yet the person came in the next day, and my client said, "Well, she came in and she did the same thing again." And I said, "Well, so what are you going to do?" And and I could tell she just wanted to go home. No, she did not really want to deal with it. And I said, "You need to go talk to her. You need to go talk to her and learn whether she can do this or not." And honestly, I was kind of at the point with the person that I would be. It's time to let her go. Because it's
time to transition.
Time on this. It's you've spent, and there's obviously not a shared value thing happening here. So, yeah.
Well, I also think it's. I have this idea of I only fire people for reasons to where they've done they've stolen, that's a fire.
Right.
In my position, in my thought. Okay. There's another situation that I think is potentially this one, is where you transition someone out of the company or out of their role, because the reality is, it tells me if that person came in the next day and they just did the same thing, that this is just not a good fit for them. And we need to set them up for success in an area somewhere else where it's a good fit. Okay, are you ready for rapid fire questions?
I am.
Okay.
I should have reviewed them earlier, but I can handle it.
No, that defeats the point of rapid fire. Katie, don't send them rapid fire questions.
Well, I read them and I thought I can rapid fire those. Go ahead. Let's go for it.
All right, let's do it. Okay,
Yes.
First one. What does leaving a legacy mean to you?
For me, that means that I've created this entire body of work, and it's having it in a form that if something happened to me tomorrow, other people would still benefit from it. And I'm at a point in my career where I'm starting to do more online things that people can just go watch, and having that, really being able to speak one to many in different circumstances. So that for me is a legacy. And having 2 daughters that I want to make sure that they really understand who I was. So, yeah.
Okay, up next. What's the best advice you've ever received?
The best advice, I guess I didn't see these ahead of time because I would have thought that out. The best advice I've ever received, I think that it was, the best advice I had ever received actually was when I went up to visit, when I inquired about studying engineering. It was this woman, her name was Kathy McClanningham, and she actually came to my house. She worked for the school, and she was a recruiter. And it's funny because I know her now. She's not very much older than I am. It was funny because at the time she seemed so old, not old like ancient, but like so mature. And I was a senior in high school, and she came to my house and she told me, she said, if you study engineering, you will never regret it, and you will love going to Tri-State. And her words really stuck with me, and she's right, because as much as I love what I'm doing now, I know that base was so important for me to become who I am. So, yeah.
Okay, next one.
Cunningham, if you're out there, call me.
Yes, exactly. Okay, one book every leader should read.
They should read the Black Belt edition of Spiral Impact, The Power to Get It Done with Grace. So not the
Perfect.
white. There's a first edition that's a white cover. This has about 40% more content in it. So you want the Black Belt edition. Okay.
Absolutely. Always go for the best. As badass listeners, you should go for the best anyway. So just skip forward to that.
And by the way, I recorded that too. It's in audio if you're not a reader. So
the black one is?
Yeah, it is. It's on Audible on Amazon. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big Audible person. Okay.
Okay.
Favorite martial arts principle that applies to business?
Oh. It's interesting because I knew you were going to ask me my favorite quote, and this might be the same one. Well, you know what? Okay, no, I'm not going to use that. I'm going to say keep moving and bend your knees. And I don't know if
and you have that in the book. Yes, I have that highlighted.
My book starts with that and ends with that. And what does that mean? It means that bending your knees naturally brings your center of gravity down lower and makes you more stable. And moving, as I have a quote in the front of my book that is something about stillness fosters clarity, and movement creates knowledge. I think to be clear and moving is true power. It's in the front. It's like on top of a.
Yep.
What is it? What's that? That's my quote. I should know it better, right?
I know. It has your name, Karen.
I know.
Maybe it's another Karen. I don't know. They're all amazing, as we learned. Right?
I know.
Okay.
I know.
So communication creates movement.
There we go.
Stillness fosters clarity. To be moving and clear, this is true power.
There you go. Yeah.
And I also want to read, since you mentioned that, because I had this highlighted in your book. And listeners, this is on, or readers, when you buy the book, It's on page 3. If you're listening to it, it's in the section called Momentum Interrupted.
Yeah.
And you talk about keep moving and bend your knees. These words echo in your head whenever you begin a struggle. Moving naturally reduces resistance, and bending knees lowers your center of gravity for stability and flexibility, which we've talked about.
Yeah.
And so then you talk about your martial arts practice, and then you say the martial art, Aikido, mimics life. Movement gives us energy and creativity. Struggle and fear make us feel stuck. The
Yeah.
choices you make either create or stop momentum, both on the Aikido practice mat and in life and work. So keep moving and bend your knees. In everyday life means be flexible and ask questions for continuous learning.
There you go. There you go.
I loved it. I highlighted it.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah.
Okay.
So-
What's one habit you swear by for staying grounded under pressure?
I have a meditation and breathing practice I do almost every morning. And I am a true believer most of my clients, I start them with breathing, because when you start a breathing practice, and I do a very simple one, in through your mouth, out through your nose, and I usually do movement with it, and it just helps you come to center. And I spend probably a half hour every morning sitting and breathing and meditating and really getting clear on what I want, my intention of my day and my life. So that's a practice.
I love it.
That's a practice. And we talked a lot about physics, and a lot of what we've talked about is Newtonian physics. But, on some level, we move into something that is more quantum physics in this work. And one of the things that I like to do with my students in Aikido, and if I'm working in person with my coaching students too, is if they grab my wrist like they're going to attack me, punch me, what I want to do, now one way I can be very rote, like what we're doing, is spiral in. But another thing I can do is I can just shift and relax wherever I feel tense. And when I do that, I get their center, and it shifts everything. So there's lots of levels in there, and I think the more subtle you can be, because when another practice, I could stand across from somebody and we can shift where we are. And and to think about, I know Lean In was a very popular book by Sheryl Sandberg. I hated that concept. I still do. I do. It's like, leaning in.
Cringe.
It's like leaning in. You're putting pressure on something, and it's what about stepping in? Step in your glory.
Yeah. I'm not. I agree with you.
Yeah.
I have the book. It is not one of the ones I've chosen for my podcast studio. Okay.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
If you had to sum up your philosophy in one sentence, Karen, what would it be?
Distinguish the difference between force and power, and own your true power.
Love it. Okay. Where can listeners connect with you or dive deeper into Spiral Impact?
I would highly recommend going to my website, which can be karenvalencic.com or spiralimpact.com. And I have, I do stuff on YouTube. I've really become a fan of Substack lately, and the link is there at my website. I also just launched my first on-demand course, and I'm going to be ending up having support with that on Substack as well. So anything I've got going on, I will always have on my website. And because I keep moving and bend my knees, it continues to change, right?
Okay, that's great. So Badass Leaders Podcast followers, as a reminder, we always put all of these links in the show notes.
Okay.
So check out our show notes. And while you're there, also make sure you subscribe to the podcast. If you're one of those 95% of listeners who are loving this but not subscribing, go ahead and subscribe and click on those links so that you can find that information. And my final question for you, Karen, is your favorite motivational quote. That is a requirement for this podcast. What is yours?
Okay. That can change at times. But right now, my favorite quote is, we don't rise to the levels of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training. And that was a Greek philosopher, and his name is Arkil Archelaus, I think is how you say his name. The Navy SEALs use it, but it's so true because we can sit here and talk philosophy and we can have all this knowledge in our head, but it's the practice, it's the reps that we put in. It's the sitting, my morning sitting, getting calm and being clear is what I fall to. And so it's that practice that you have is what defines what you'll do when things get tough. So that's my favorite quote right now.
Alrighty, community. I love that too. I love that. I used to race triathlons, and so I can tell you when I did an Ironman without training, it was not as much fun as when I actually trained. So what was that? So so community, make sure you go on either Amazon or on Audible or both and purchase the book. Check out the website, see if you can register for the course that's coming up, and then connect on all social channels with Karen. Karen, thank you so much for bringing some badass to this podcast today.
Hey, this has been fun being one badass leader to another, one engineer to another.
Love it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, hey, it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining me for today's episode of the Badass Leaders Podcast. To hear more interviews with industry experts and learn how to grow your career and leadership potential, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to ensure you do not miss future episodes. This podcast is a production of the AGN Group. To learn more about the AGN Group, visit our website at theagnGroup.com. There, you can discover more about our services, which include hosting workshops, management consulting, brand strategy, keynote speaking, and more. Follow us on all social media channels shown on the screen and displayed in the show notes. And until next week, be brave and be badass.